Hello and welcome to Limitless TV. My name is Kez, and over the next few episodes, we're going to be exploring some big questions. In the last episode, we explored the problem of suffering. And in this episode, we'll be asking the question, is there evidence for God? The famous scientist Richard Dawkins said, faith is the great cop-out, the great excuse to evade the need to think and evaluate evidence. Has God been disproved?
I think that religion should be criticised on intellectual grounds as providing a competitor to the scientific explanation of life and the universe.
Because the God who created this universe, if it was created by God, is quite clearly a maniac.
You don't believe in God, then where's your moral barometer?
Science does not rule out the existence of a creator, by definition, because we don't know how the universe began, full stop.
But we have a hope. There's a plan in this book of redemption. God has a plan for the future, your future, and God is interested in you.
I'm here with my friend Mark Greenwood, and Mark, you're a Christian.
Yeah.
Is Christianity just all about faith and not about evidence?
Yeah. It's a really interesting question, and I think it's one of those questions, and I hope this is not too blunt, but it's one of those questions that people often ask because they've heard other people say it, rather than them knowing themselves. Not always, but often. And it comes in all kinds of iterations. It's like, well, Christianity is faith-based, whereas science is evidence-based, for example. And so whenever people say, I want evidence, I often say, what type of evidence do you want that would convince you? And what saddens me is people often opt for the science-based evidence. That's the evidence I want, and unless I see that kind of evidence. When I was growing up, I wanted to be a lawyer. You may not know me.
No,
you do know me, but you may not know this about me.
No,
I wanted to be a lawyer and a judge. I've always been fascinated. Some of my favourite programmes are about how cases are solved. My brain's wired to kind of think about evidence, and I just love grappling with these issues. And so this kind of whole thing's right up my street. And so I was probably a little bit more excited than I should be when I got a summons not for me. I'd not done anything wrong. But you do get a summons to be on jury service. And I was a little bit giddy, I'm not going to lie. And I absolutely loved it. It was really, really fantastic.
Oh, wow.
And, but that taught me some really interesting things. And one of the things it taught me is that scientific evidence is, yes, it is valid in a court of law, but it's not always available to prove something and to substantiate something. I remember one particular case I wanted to say I was on then, like I was some kind of judge, but I was on the jury anyway. And the judge, he's like his little pep talk before you kind of get involved in the case. He says, I'm here as a judge of the law, so I'm here to make sure that everything that's carried out is legal. And then he spoke to us as the members of the jury, said, you're here as the judge of the evidence. What you've got to do is look at the evidence and say what you think that evidence, or what you believe rather, that evidence to be concluding. He says you're not always going to know, but you've got to ask certain things like, is it beyond reasonable doubt? And then he said, don't look at the evidence that you don't have, don't concern yourself with that. Look at the evidence that you do have, and based on that evidence, you then make your decision whether you believe the person was guilty or not guilty. And I would say most of the cases that we did, there was no scientific evidence available. The only evidence we had was the word of a witness giving, here's a legal phrase that we use in the church, but it's a legal phrase, giving a testimony. And the testimony given by the witness was to factually recount what they know of the situation. So we, as the members of the jury, had to listen to this person, and based upon the word of a witness, which is enough evidence, we had to say, is the person guilty or not guilty? And so for me, I think if somebody really wants to examine the evidence for whether God's true, Jesus is real, whether Jesus did what he said he did, I think, yeah, you need to look at Jesus, as we talk about in another program, but actually you need to speak to the witnesses as well. And for me, Christians, Jesus' followers are the witnesses. The Bible is a witness giving their account. The writings of non-Christian people like Josephus and Tacitus are all the words of a witness giving their account of what they believe to have happened. But the sadness is we reject that as valid evidence, and we put so much emphasis on scientific truth. In fact, we overplay scientific authority and we underplay the word of a witness as valid authority. And so I think if we want to be genuine at looking at the evidence for the case, whether Jesus is real and true or not, I think we need to look at the word of a witness. The former Lord Chief Justice of England, Lord Taylor, said no sane jury looking at the evidence for the resurrection would fail to bring in a verdict other than it happened. And that's like a top legal brain. And the late Sir Lionel Luckhoo, I'm going to read this because I won't remember it. He was a politician, a diplomat, and a well-known lawyer. Listen to this. He's famed for 245 consecutive successful defenses in murder cases. And he's actually in the Guinness Book of World Records as the most successful lawyer ever, right? He said this: I've spent more than 42 years as a defense trial lawyer, appearing in many parts of the world, and I'm still in active practice. I have been fortunate to secure a number of successes in jury trials, and I say unequivocally, the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ is so overwhelming, it compels acceptance by proof, which leaves absolutely no room for doubt. So these are people whose minds are trained to analyze, meticulously look at evidence, and to conclude what is true. And what really inspires me with these people is they weren't Christians who looked at the evidence to substantiate what they already believed. At the time when they looked at the evidence, they were people that didn't believe in Christianity, didn't believe that all the evidence pointed to Jesus being who he said he was, looked into it to build up a case to substantiate what they didn't believe, but in doing so discovered quite the opposite to what they believe.
That is amazing.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, that is awesome. That these people who, that is what they're trained in, that is
absolutely
their profession, to look at evidence. And through doing that, through looking at the evidence for Jesus, came to faith. So do you have some of that evidence for us? Yeah,
so I mean, we haven't got time to go into lots, which is one of the reasons why we're recommending lots of books, okay? Because I will talk about a certain few pieces of evidence, but rather than me telling you what they are, you're best to go and look at them in the books where you've got the proper references. So books like Evidence That Demands a Verdict, some of the other books that we're going to recommend. So books like Who Moved the Stone by an American lawyer, Frank Morrison, again, who looked into the resurrection. So what he did is they looked into the life of Jesus, and some of what we touched in another program about whether Jesus's claims were true and real. So they looked into that and helped us to think through. There's a kind of a logical process here, like almost like a deducing beyond reasonable doubt. But then you look at the likes of Tacitus and Josephus that we mentioned, who are people that wrote about the life of Jesus, but who weren't believers. They weren't Christians with a bias. They were just reporting factually. So they talk about the existence of Jesus. So if you look at those early writings, Pliny, Suetonius, these are all the early writers who talk about this person called Jesus and claim that he rose again from the dead, talk about the followers that claim that he rose again from the dead. So there's lots of writings out there. And again, you can see some of the authorities on this in the books that we recommend throughout all these programs. But if you look at those, you'll be able to see the sources of those as well, which is really, really helpful. But I want to play a different tack as well, if I may, because I want to say is even if something can't be proved, it doesn't mean it's not true. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Now look, you work in a school, right? I want you to imagine you're in a school and you're doing a lesson, okay, and you're in a fairly well-behaved class, but there's a couple of people right in the front row who are being a bit naughty. You're writing something on the board, or the board that shows my age, or on the posh screens, all right?
Yes.
Okay, and everybody else is working. You turn around and there's two young people kicking each other under the table, messing about. Everybody else is oblivious to that, but you see it. And you turn around to them and say, stop that. And they say, stop what, miss? You say, stop messing about. We're not messing about. Stop, yeah, I've seen you, stop messing about. And they say, we didn't do it. And you said, I saw you with my own eyes. And what do they say? You can't prove it. And you can't prove it scientifically, unless you have maybe had technology there, CCTV. Imagine you've not got that in there. Nobody else saw it, so there isn't even a word of a witness. But you know that it happened. But just because you can't prove it, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So there's lots of evidence out there, but I want to suggest that even if there's no evidence, it doesn't mean it's not true. It's not reason for saying that Jesus isn't true, Jesus isn't real, Christianity isn't real, God isn't real. And sometimes it's really frustrating. So when I come home, I'm out filming quite late, I've been out all day, I get home tonight, see my wife, I give her a little kiss on the head, say, love you, darling. She doesn't say, whoa, 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 before I accept that, prove it. And she fastens me up to some electronic machine that measures the pulses as I kiss her on the head and say, I love you. Oh, yeah, no, that's registered. Yeah, that's registered. Now I believe scientifically that you... And it would be really sad if she rang you up and said, do you think he loves me? She looks to a word of a witness to substantiate it.
Yeah.
I hope that there's enough of a personal relationship with my wife that she knows that I love her. And for me, the greatest evidence to knowing that God's true and God's real is a personal relationship. So I would always encourage people to look into embracing God, thinking through. Don't wait till you've got every bit of evidence sorted out before you take a step, because actually it's that taking that step that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that it's true and that it's real. The frustration then is for somebody who's a Jesus follower is trying to prove it to other people.
Wow, that is amazing. Thank you so much, Mark.
My
I
pleasure.
really appreciate that. Mark talked about evidence, and if you want to find out a bit more about that evidence, you can find it in Who Moved the Stone by Frank Morrison and Evidence That Demands a Verdict by Josh and Sean McDowell. Thanks so much for watching. We hope you've enjoyed, and we'll see you soon.